Yeah, yes, yes, Sada.
Professor Bhatt is my PhD supervisor.
Hello, namaste. Hello, good evening, William.
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Marvelous program. Good evening. Marvelous program that you are coordinating, and Sada has been a wonderful student of mine, and always I'm privileged to have such students. Absolutely.
No, it's great to have you on board, sir. It's great to have you on board.
My pleasure. Always. My pleasure.
So we already 5:30 now. So I think if everybody is there,
we will begin.
What 5:30 time now? So
Atyab is joining in a minute.
Okay.
Atyab is on?
Not yet. Joining now in a minute.
All right. All right. So maybe we can start.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So everyone, here I am. You can see me, I think. Okay, great. So great to see everybody again. This is our third webinar. We have 20 to go. It's going to be a long year for us. But it's great to have everybody on the call today once again. It's a rainy day here in Manila. It has cooled down a bit, some of the heat, but it's nice to meet up like this every Tuesday and look at something that is becoming more and more pertinent, more and more relative to our lives in this period of the pandemic. As most of us have been witnessing, the story of migrant workers has come on global media and on policy discourse in a way it has never come before. And there are immense changes in discourse that are today prevalent in many different communities and among many different stakeholders. So it is a fantastic time to actually talk about the Global Compact on Migration, which up until its negotiation period there was a big buzz about it. And then after it was negotiated and adopted, we are now in the second year and we are up for review. And the question is, where are we in the implementation? That hype, that excitement 2 years ago of having the most comprehensive document that states across the world have signed on to, where is it today? Where is it when we need it most in this time of the pandemic to be able to guide policy making, to be able to guide migration governance, to be able to look at how to build back? What have we done in migration governance before that has created challenges for us in this present pandemic? What are the lessons we are learning and how can we improve and change on that? And for that, we will focus today on GCM Objective 3, which is about providing accurate and timely information at all stages of migration. This is a very interesting topic, and we have an excellent panel with us today who will kick us off in these discussions. But before I move to the panel, I'd like us to think about this, all of us collectively. Is there such a thing as information overload? You know, we speak of information overload. I see it definitely on the ground, at least before the pandemic, definitely on the ground. Every time I go to a country of destination, you see so many booklets around by CSOs, recruitment agencies, private sector, banks, governments, so much of information available for migrant workers as to what they can be doing abroad. They're called pre-departure orientation programs, trainings, and things like that. So migrants are given a lot of information. So is there such a thing as information overload? Is there such a thing as irrelevant information? That all this information that we are giving them is really irrelevant to them, because it's not having any impact on them. Is that something real? Some people, many social workers tell us this, that migrants are coming with very little information. How can that be? When you visit a country of origin, there's so much of information available. So where are things going wrong? Poor information. Is information being constantly updated? Or is something that was prepared 5 years ago is still in circulation? Is there such a thing as poor information? Is it too much of information by all different stakeholders? And instead of coordinating among different stakeholders, who's giving what kind of information. Everybody is doing their own niche work without coordination. And in the end, everybody is giving information, but nobody is learning, nobody is hearing. It's not translating into knowledge. Is that a possibility? Withholding of information, is that happening with migrant workers? That information is being given to them, but relevant information, information that would make a difference for them in times of crisis, like now in the pandemic, or in times when they are in trouble. Is that kind of information being given or being withheld? Is the information timely? And this is another question to ask ourselves. Is the information timely? Are they getting the information at the time they need it? Or is it like so much of information, so much of reading material is given, but if it's not given at the right time, who knows when it will be read? So like many of us then who have books that are lying on our shelves that we picked up in seminars, that are there, that we liked because the title looked very nice, or that we liked because the color design of the cover page was very good, or we liked because the author was somebody we know, and we picked up and we put there hoping to get to it someday, but have never got into it. This is what we will explore today in GCM Objective 3. Migrants are the recipient of information. So while there is an Objective 3 talks about giving timely information, so while migrants are recipient, an important discussion point in this conversation today will be is, what is the feedback? When you give so much of information to migrant workers, who is listening to them as to how this information is being internalized, incorporated into their life, and becoming knowledge that they pass on to their peers, that serves them in times of crisis, that serves them in time of need? How is this feedback with regard to information being observed? And how is it being absorbed? We talk about learning methodologies, learning techniques. It's not only about giving. Different people, different cultures, different situations, different contexts, different moments, people learn differently. We know of this, what is it, 7 intelligences? How people learn differently. We do this in schooling with children, you know. We have different ways of transmitting information, transmitting knowledge to children in school because people learn differently. How are we giving information to migrant workers in a way that is adapted to their learning need and learning capacity? This is the conversation that we will have today. And we've got an excellent panel. People who have been engaged in this for the longest time, people who look at this and who struggle with it, and who are looking for responses to this as well, and trying to implement this in a way that it makes a difference in the life of migrant workers. To start off then, today I will ask our first panelist to, to, uh, to, to share with us on the work that he is doing. And our first panelist today is Mohammad Zarkani. He is the Chief of Mission of IOM in Bahrain. He has been with IOM for some time, and he has served in the Gulf region now already in Kuwait, where he has done substantive work there. He's helped in Saudi Arabia and the Human Rights Commission there with work he has done there. He has been project manager on several projects of the IOM. He is very, very well informed on many of the regional processes. And I know that for at least for the last 2, 3 years now, we have been collaborating, and he has been very hands-on in looking at what has been called within the Abu Dhabi dialogue a comprehensive information orientation program. And I know it has not been easy as he has looked at how to make this relevant, how to make this meaningful, how to get different stakeholders on board. And he has been somebody whom this issue has been at his heart for some time now. And I know that because I have journeyed with him for the last 2, 3 years now on this particular course. And so I'm very glad that he accepted and is with us today to share with us on some of the work that he has been doing in this area. So Mohammad Zarkani, welcome and thank you for accepting. And Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, William, for this very kind, warm introduction. It is an honor and privilege to be part of this very distinguished panel and with those esteemed participants. And I'm very much looking forward to my interventions today. I thought to focus really on 3 key areas. Key findings on information provision across the labor migration process. And I will tell you more about also the Comprehensive Information Orientation Program, which we call CIOP, as well as a 3rd area would be challenges and lessons learned in this process. So when we talk about information across the labor migration cycle, we need to also think first, what is the role of information? So from IOM's perspective, it's international labor migration is obviously increasingly complex. In turn, information plays an increasingly significant role in influencing the experience of migrant workers. The provision of relevant and accurate information can support migrant workers in making decisions that are right for themselves and their loved one, as well as encourage safe and regular forms of migration, and as well as enhancing preparedness and, most importantly, what you have referred to, William, in your introduction, protection measures. On the other hand, gaps or misinformation can have dire consequences. It can leave migrant workers vulnerable to unsafe migration, exploitation, some cases of human trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, just to name a few of a very long list that we're all aware of. Now, what are some of the common misinformation gaps? To further understand this landscape, IOM, with a number of different partners, including MFA, carried out an extensive multi-year mapping exercise with the aim to fully understand information available to prospective as well as current migrant workers throughout their journey in different countries. So we focused on 3 stages. The first stage being pre-employment, also known as pre-decision, which is a point which a prospective migrant worker is deliberating on the feasibility of foreign employment. We found very few countries have a formal and structured pre-employment orientation program, I think with the exception of the Philippines. Relevant information was mostly found to be part of other programs such as anti-trafficking or decent work initiatives. Also, we have a lot of efforts as well from grassroots organizations, civil society organizations, in which they had more those awareness raising programs. I remember always fondly my good colleague and friend from ILO, Shabari, who tells me, Mohammed, pre-employment orientation, this happens under a banyan tree in which we talk informally. It's not a classroom. It's not something that is provided in a structured manner. It is literally a nice conversation under a banyan tree where we talk about how would it look like if I decide to go and work abroad. And I take this to heart, and I think because it's very important that we look at delivering orientation already in a context that we know is relevant and would be the most adequate for the individual, for the prospective migrant to make their decision. So our takeaway as well is that there is not enough tailored and accurate information that is provided to effectively support the decision-making process of those going or thinking of going abroad for work. So we ask, do they have the tools to be able to fully understand what the process of labor migration actually entails? Develop healthy and realistic expectations, self-reflect on the competitiveness of their own skill sets, know of the different vocational training opportunities available to them locally. we found there is major gaps in this information, which again has led to many situations of migrants arriving to the country of destination, going through severe homesickness experience and wanting to return or not integrating well in the country of destination, as well as obviously fall into different potential situations of exploitation when it comes to the recruitment process itself. So that's for the pre-employment orientation phase. For the pre-departure orientation phase, which a migrant worker has already signed an employment contract, as in the process of completing the relevant procedures before leaving his or her home country to go abroad for work. Pre-departure, as we all know, is very well established. Most of the countries that we looked at specifically in Asia have very well established formal institutionalized program for pre-departure orientation. However, we found sometimes that the timing and information of many of these programs are not always aligned. For example, in pre-departure sessions that focus on the importance of costs and the steps for safe recruitment, participants would have already invested significant time and resources in their journey and therefore would be less inclined to deter. Or for example, sessions that outline in some countries of destination a copy of a birth certificate may be required to open a bank account. Many migrant workers have already left their hometowns, are already in the capital, making it too late to get this documentation. This will be information will be more effectively delivered obviously before this point. So there is a bit of gap in the when the information is delivered and what information is delivered. Then we have the post-arrival orientation, which is the stage where the migrant workers have obviously already arrived in the country of destination and is settling into a new routine and workplace. We found that only a few of the countries surveyed had a formalized also post-arrival orientation program. Information for migrant workers can originate from relevant government institutions of the country of destination, diplomatic missions, migrant community networks and organizations. Frameworks centralizing the provision of information are sporadic, to say the very least, and standardizing some of these components would be actually a very key approach. Post-arrival orientation program does not only act as an opportunity to reinforce key information, but also helps migrant workers understand how to navigate the laws and socio-cultural norms of the country of destination, where to go if they need help and what their rights and obligations are. I mean, I don't want to delve more into those three areas because I think we're going to be discussing them throughout the 2 hours anyways. So maybe I'll just give you a bit of a snapshot on the Comprehensive Information Orientation Program, CIOP. So what is CIOP basically? It was actually initially spearheaded by the government of Philippines and later adopted as a regional initiative of the Abu Dhabi Dialogue in around the year 2014. CIOP is rooted in the idea that information should be tailored, accurate, and harmonized throughout the experience of migrant workers. It ensures that the right information is delivered at the right time, as well as optimizes knowledge retention while identifying synergies. For this, it focuses on conceptualizing and developing tailored orientation specifically for these three key points in the labor migration cycle. Based on some of the findings of the mappings that we did and the insights, CIOP has developed orientation modules and training material that addresses the information needs of migrant workers at different points in their journey. I'm very happy to share a link to those guides and modules for the use of participants today. So IOM is currently working closely with a number of governments to actually pilot CIOP and to understand how harmonized and accurate information may have a different impact on migrant workers that have received the orientation as institutionalized now, specifically looking at the Asia GCC corridor. Right now, we're looking to conduct this pilot, looking at migrant workers going from Sri Lanka, Philippines to the UAE, as well as Bangladesh to the UAE. We're going to be doing a full evaluation of the impacts of this approach, and hopefully this will be a public useful document for others to use. So the benefits of CIOP really is that we envision that this harmonized approach to information will start with informing more effectively the decision-making process of prospective migrant workers. This will then ensure that better preparedness and less vulnerability to exploitation for those who decide to ultimately go ahead with foreign employment. They will be equipped with information on safe recruitment and regular migration, as well as understanding legislation and socio-cultural norms of the country of destination. So we really hope that then this will support the preparedness and protection of migrant workers, as well as help them navigate in a new country and a new workplace. Of course, this comes today with a bit of challenges. I mean, COVID-19 is definitely one. I mean, it has upended much of the world of work as we know it. It will obviously have a significant impact on its future, including the norm of orientation programs and how it's delivered. So we're also molding CIOP to be as responsive as possible to these current changes and those that we anticipate. For example, how do we reconceptualize our idea of orientation sessions to always safeguard the welfare and safety of beneficiaries and facilitators? Also, what additional information will migrant workers need to be equipped with in a world in which global health concerns are increasingly at the forefront of policies? They would need to fully understand, obviously, the risks, including volatility of certain industry and sectors, as well as relevant regulations and the rights. I think I'll stop here. And I know, because I don't want to speak for too long, but I look forward to potentially touching upon other very key areas of the experience of IOM with orientation, hopefully to the benefit and the interests of participants. Thank you very much. Over to you, William.
Thank you. Thank you very much again, Mohammed, because thank you very much for that. And I think it was quite comprehensive in terms of what is happening. But that still, I think you touched upon it in saying that you would like to look at, I mean, the need for protection for migrant workers, the relevant information. But I think that is something I would like you to go a little bit more deeper into coming around in the next round to actually look at how is that being ensured. You know, the necessary information, because I know for a fact, and we know this for a fact now during this time of COVID, for example, you know, you would think that in a crisis situation like this, and we've had IOM's program on migrants in countries in crisis, we were involved in the drafting of those guidelines and things like that. And yet in this time of the pandemic, we know that even now there are migrant workers who are not getting the right kind of information of how to deal with the pandemic and how and what are their options at all stages. Now the return repatriation process, or whether if they are stranded in the country of destination, what to do kind of thing. So there is this fear, this not knowing, this uncertainty kind of thing. Information is not reaching. And so is this how we are protecting? Is this how states are giving information? What is missing? And I think it would be really good to see what is IOM's experience in this, because I know that you have, as IOM, entered into a lot of situations of crisis and help repatriation processes and things like that. So it will be good to get into that kind of a nitty-gritty kind of thing, rather than just I think where the focus, and I want to move this discussion away from packaged information to information that is that is relevant, that is, you know, immediately absorbed and becomes knowledge. And this is what I'm hoping we can get into in this webinar, because the objective so clearly states it: timely and right information. timely and right information kind of thing is what we need to be looking at. So that's why it's nice to go to our next speaker, Atyab, who is the Secretary, Deputy Secretary General of the Kuwait Kuwait Center for Society for Human Rights. And Atyab has been very involved in both research around migrant workers and what's happening to migrant workers in Kuwait, very much involved hands-on as a lawyer in dealing with cases of migrant workers, as well as very involved in preparing, and I think this was with the IOM itself as well, these kind of handbooks in many different languages on what migrants need to know. And she's flashing it there, that little packet that they bring in every seminar that we go to, which are of several languages of information that migrant workers in Kuwait need to have. And again, the society prepared these booklets. The question is, why did the society have to prepare these booklets? Were migrants coming not informed? Was there something wrong in this chain of information that you all had to go to produce so many booklets of your own? And what was the process and the need for it? Atyab, over to you. Atyab, you have to unmute your mic. Did we?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who attended this webinar. I'd like to thank William too, thank Rolla and everyone here. Information from a perspective that combined both human rights work and legal work. I have noticed for the past, let's say, 5 years working in the migrant workers field or in migrant workers' rights, migrant workers come to Kuwait facing the language barrier. It is devastating and exhausting, not only on the basis of work, but mainly on the basis of knowing your rights, knowing when to demand something, when to say that you can stop something, when to understand whether if it's a violation to your right or not. And I think information exchange is very essential to the whole working process in Kuwait, whether if it's for migrants or citizens, and providing a very accurate information was a challenge. Because when you come to courts, let's say I'm an attorney and I practice my work at courts, I rarely find translators, migrant workers who are coming to claim their rights before the judge, right, to judiciary. Even if it is stated there that there will be translators, we rarely find them. And this is the barrier that stands between an individual or migrant workers and the ability to know their rights. And we try to overcome this barrier through more than one project. Actually, we've been doing a project called Together. First of all, I'd like to talk a bit about the Kuwait Society for Human Rights. And of course, thank William and Rolla too for always including us in this very, very active, let's say, coalition and cooperation. We've been there with the MFA in Dubai. We've been there in Istanbul. Kuwait Society for Human Rights really appreciate the hard work that William does to advocate for migrant workers. So the Kuwait Society for Human Rights, it was established back in 1988 as a branch of the Arab Organizations for Human Rights. We're a non-government organization dedicated to the protection and promotion of human rights in Kuwait and the Arab world, accordance with the international standards established by the United Nations consensus and in the international conventions. Of course, I have my colleague, Mr. Saleh Al-Hassan, is the one that I really stand out for him because he is the one who dedicated, let's say, 80% of the Kuwait Society for Human Rights efforts for migrant workers. He was the spark that started the project Together. And the project Together has gone through more than one phase. Phase 1, which was in cooperation with the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Kuwait. The project aimed to participate in enlightening migrant workers in Kuwait regarding their rights as stated in the national laws and, of course, the international conventions like ILO conventions and migrant worker conventions. The project had goals. One of them, and the most important, was to translate the labor law in Kuwait in more than one language. So this tiny bag that I was flashing at the beginning contained these booklets that we have worked on. And this actually was the first copy of the booklet. It's way developed, way improved now. This had only 5 languages. Now we are covering 7. So we are very proud to say, and the first one was for the labor law. At that time, when the project on its first phase, Kuwait didn't issue the domestic workers law yet. So we had these including only the labor law. And of course, we had them in Urdu. We had them in this language. Of course, English, everybody speaks it. Some Arabic. We had even comics. We wanted to facilitate the information for every migrant to help them become their own lawyers, because when somebody knows an info, it's going to be a lot easier for them. Even the comics, we translated them in a lot of languages. And I would like to share with you the aims to the project. Okay, so we had these comics to facilitate. We don't have it in Nepali. I think there are 7 languages now, and I think Nepali is one of them, because in the third phase, which is I'm going to be explaining next to you, we included the French language, because the French language is the most language used by African workers in Kuwait. See, the African workers, sir, as we have seen by field experience, most of them facing violations, and they don't have embassies in Kuwait like Ivory Coast, like Benin. So we had to translate like even more than 7. We're planning to add more than 7 languages. So in the project Together Phase 1, we translated the labor law into several languages. We had this comic books to facilitate the information for migrant workers. We spread all the information through social media platforms. We had websites. We had even an application on the mobile in which you can just download for free and get the information within your language. So these booklets, when they were just in 5 languages, we published over than 10,000 copies, which is success. Very good number. Okay, we had a public awareness campaign through social media, social media platforms. We had daily posters in different languages to explain laws for them. Of course, one of the most important activities that were there in the project was the hotline, because through, did you get the, yes, actually, we will be translating this book in Malayalam thanks to the big support of William and the colleagues in the MFA. One of them, his name is Francis. He volunteered to translate it for us in other Indian languages. So back to the main important activity in the project, which was the hotline. In the hotline, we had lawyers answering legal questions. We provided legal consultations and all kind of helps and guides and info to provide people who would call. And we got a lot of calls. The last time I checked on the hotline, we got over 4,000 calls, which is a really good number. It means we are reaching out people. Okay. Hi, Patricia. It's good to. I think I should stick to what I'm talking and not answer now. Yeah. So the people who got from the booklets are over 15,000. People who got into our website and the application were 37,025. People who called in the hotline in the first phase of Together were 2,455. So the number 4,000 is in the next project that I'm going to speak to you about. So the next phase of the project was Together 2 in cooperation with the SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. In the next phase, we included legal representation. See, when you talk about legal representation, you know how it is really expensive for migrant workers to provide attorney fees. And you do not find pro bono lawyers a lot these days, especially in Kuwait. So what happened is, in phase 2, in cooperation with the SDZ, the Kuwait Society for Human Rights was able to cover over 300 lawsuits for migrant workers who didn't have to pay anything. We covered that with the SDC. There was an observatory that was issued. Its main project is to monitor and supervise and let's say monitor all information regarding cases, regarding issues, conflicts, difficulties, challenges, all the things that really touches migrant workers' life and really makes it difficult. What are the challenges they face? This was the role of the observatory. Of course, we had another guides that we issued similar to these booklets. And regarding the one who asked me in the questions regarding the first phase of the project Together, the 5 languages were Arabic, English, Urdu, Filipino, and Hindi. But of course, now we added more languages. Okay, of course, in the second phase of Together, there was a study that really enlightens and talk about and share information, very accurate information regarding the implementation of the domestic workers law in Kuwait, which is kind of new. So Kuwait issued the domestic workers law. It's a step closer to humanity, but still from a very legal perspective. As we studied the law, we found a lot of shortfalls and gaps. We thought that we have to point out, and we did in that study. There was surveys, there was, I would love to share that study with anyone who would ask, because there was actually surveys been distributed for domestic workers to know whether they know about the law or not, if their rights are granted or not. And we had this result stating that a lot of domestic workers do not know about their rights. This kind of information is really essential to people who advocate for migrant workers' rights, because they have to know what's really happening, especially for domestic workers who face the lack of freedom of movement. There was legal consultations on the hotline, of course. In the second phase, this is nice, this is a nice number, we had provided more than 5,000 legal consultations for people who called. We had, of course, legal representation, as I told you, and we explained more of the law. We had more consultations, more people speaking, and I would like to thank Mr. Alan Jones. He's a very well-educated, very good man who helped us with the second phase of the project Together. Now in the third phase, we have expanded our work. Expanding means adopting more legal representation, adopting more awareness campaigns. We have added more than now 700 cases to be held by attorneys who have a human rights work and willing to advocate for migrant workers before the courts, of course, and more booklets. We are going to improve the platform. So the platform right now in Project 2 had 7 languages. Anyone who's in Kuwait would install this application, which is also a platform online, and would choose their language, submit their complaint, their question, what they want to know about the law. And then myself as a legal expert and Mr. Saleh, the Spark in the KSHR would answer their questions. Also, Mr. Francis, who is very active at MFA, volunteered to help us at the platform because he knows a lot of languages. This is what I really wanted to point out regarding information exchange. And thanks to information, we wouldn't reach these great numbers. We are hoping we could reach more numbers in the future. Thank you for your time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Atia. Thank you very much for that. I like the numbers that you have given. 10,000 copies of your publications. I want to know how many are still in the office. One is because I know also how NGOs, we do publications and then it remains in the office. But I really think there is a lot of stuff in what you have said with regard to the number of hotline calls, 4,000. The number of cases that have been taken up, 7,000. The number of legal consultations that you have
Sorry,
conducted.
Mr. William, for interrupting, but the lawsuits are not 7,700 and above.
700 and above. 5,000 legal consultations. That is big. That is big. That means workers are coming to you, asking you for information, seeking you out for information. And I think that is what I'm trying to get at is how do we create that, where relevant information, relevant stakeholders are engaged in this process, which is a constant dynamic process. Because I know the booklet system, I know that system, and I know that sometimes that system is not reaching as far as it should reach. It's a necessary tool. We do it, people do it, organizations do it, but is it having as much effect as, let us say, the hotline or directly talking to migrant workers, engaging migrant workers? You didn't touch upon something that I was hoping you would touch upon. I'll give you time to come back to it in the second round, is that there is also a lot of information today in mainstream media in Kuwait with regard to migrant workers, and that is not very pleasant. There's a lot of xenophobic language, a lot of xenophobia, a lot of hate speech and things like that in relation to migrants. How is media involved in this kind of information and putting out this information? And how do you get involved then in counteracting or countering this information? I saw a very good statement recently by the Kuwait Society. I'm happy you all put that statement out. I think it was last week or something like that. I like that statement, but I'll ask you to speak on that when you come around. But before I go on to the next speaker, I will call out a few people to just be ready. I'm giving you time to prepare. Noel, I see Attorney Noel on this call. I know you do information reach out through radio programs, and you're from the Philippines. We heard Mohammed say Philippines is the standard, but you, through your radio programs, you have found many challenges. I'd like you to say in 2 minutes some of those challenges over there. Anisur, I know you're a returned migrant worker who has been involved in migrant worker issues for a long time in Bangladesh. I want to know how successful you are now and what difference from the time that you were a migrant worker and the information you had, how have you improved the quality of information that is now reaching migrant workers now that you are a migrant rights advocate? I see Regiman on the call. Regiman, as a journalist, you have covered many stories. And how do you think the role of media has been? I'm asking all of you to give me only 2 minutes. I will cut you off if you go more than 2 minutes. I see Eva Ritza on the call as well. And Eva, I know you are with the UN NGO Committee on Migrants, and I know that you've engaged the UN system quite a lot. Did we get this right, Objective 3? In your opinion? Angie Tan, I know from Center for Migrant Advocacy, I know that you've worked a lot with the local government and you're on this call as well. I'd like to know what is the role of local government and how do you see local government playing a role as against the big POEA and things like that. I see Diana Palmerian from Latin America. I know we are related in some way with the Alianza Americas. It would be great to get your perspective from the Latin American region of how information is important. I see a good and a friend of mine from many years working together, Piasiri Vikramasekara from the ILO, who has been with the migrant section of ILO for a long time, and even after has continued to be as a consultant and continues to be very engaged even now on this issue. I'd like your thoughts on this, whether on GCM Objective 3. And then finally, somebody who's journeyed with migrant workers across seas and across oceans and even followed them through their homes back home. I see a good friend, Manfred Bergman from Italy, who has worked with many migrant workers and children of migrant workers and continues to be an educator for migrant workers. I will call upon all of you for a 2-minute intervention if calling you out now just to be ready. But let me go back to the speakers. I'm giving you a heads up, so don't disappear now that I have called you. All right. Let me go to our next speaker then. And, uh, and our next speaker is, let me see if I forget now the order in my excitement, but our next speaker is, yes, Attorney Francis. My team knows him as Attorney Kiko. And when we were looking for a resource person for this from the Philippines, I like the way my team described Attorney Kiko as a very passionate lawyer working with the POEA and flashing what was called the handbook for migrant workers as if it was the tool that every migrant worker must have. And he was proudly flashing it to a group of civil society and other government officials and things like that. Attorney Kiko, you have done work on this, you are doing work on this, and Philippines is always cited as the example par excellence. We'll have two Filipino speakers who I've just called on, Noel and Angie, who will share from a civil society kind of perspective. But I'd like your perspective from the government. Do you think you all are doing enough? Do you think your workers go really as empowered as they should be? And do you think all the information that is relevant to them, like our Mohammed said, in terms of protection and empowerment, is they are equipped with this so that when they are in that experience, they know what to do, they know how to respond, they are in the right zone. Attorney Kiko, over to you.
All right. Yes. Thank you, William. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
All right. Yes. I actually wish that I could be flashing the OFW handbook right now, but since the pandemic, we're still in quarantine here over in Manila, in the Philippines. So it's stuck in the press. So we're currently doing the finalization for the press work right now. We just had our bid for the English version of the handbook, and afterwards we'd do the Filipino, the localized version of the handbook. And if budget allows it, would hopefully be able to upload it by the end of the year or by early next year to something that would be able to be accessed online. So at least that's the bit of an update on the handbook. Now, going to your initial question of whether or not the Philippines is doing enough in terms of in terms of objective 3 of providing accurate and timely information, I'd have to say the information has always been there. Okay, the information has always been there. Have we been doing enough to reach out and to, at the very least, as we say in the academe, to bring the knowledge to the recipient of that knowledge, or to bring the information to the end user that is that is intended to actually be using that kind of information. Coming from government, I would have to respond with a calculated no. Okay, I'd have to say no because even though for a fact that we have policies, and as already been compared and has already been mentioned by the previous speakers, we do have quite a good framework regarding migration, and in particular migrant labor and migrant work. We in government in particular, at least the current administration and the team that I'm working with right now, we are constantly reminded that what we are doing is not enough, and there is always room for improvement. Okay, we could always aim for something better. Okay, we could always aim for something better, and complacency complacency shouldn't be part of it. Okay, because just as we thought that there might be that we might have distributed enough materials, or that we might have provided enough information out there to our overseas Filipino workers, here comes complainants, here comes some fortuitous or some event such as the global pandemic that we have right now, which is totally unheard of, that comes into play, which all of us would have to redo and to rethink our strategies just to be able to respond to it. So as a response to that one, we do have the policy framework, but in terms of the implementation, there's still room for improvement on how we would be able to implement better in terms of policy and providing accurate and timely information. But as you've mentioned earlier, and as part of the brief that was provided to me regarding this discussion, I was given the task of discussing government interventions in terms of providing information. Okay, the role of government in providing information to migrants. In the case of the Philippines, this would mostly be the migrant workers that we have. So I would just want to walk to give a walkthrough at least to our colleagues from other countries aside from the Philippines, that the Philippines works on a framework, on a legal framework that has both a statutory component, or at least the written law, and that has a regulatory component, or at least how we do or how we actually implement the written statutes or the written codes, or at least the codification of the law. So in terms of that legal framework, the two-tiered approach, both the statutory and at the same time the regulatory framework, works hand in hand. And why am I saying that it works hand in hand? Of course, we do know for a fact that laws by themselves, even though they are codified, would not be able to serve its purpose without any particular regulatory body, or without any particular implementing agency. Okay? Without any particular implementing agency. As we say in the Philippines, we do have a long list of laws, and we do subscribe and we do adhere to a long list of international conventions and treaties as well, which of course constitutionally under the Constitution of the Philippines forms part of the law of the land. So first things first, the Philippine framework on migration basically is one of the anchors of it is of course the Migrant Workers Act, Republic Act 10/0022, which under which basically provides that we only send Filipino workers to or we only deploy Filipino workers to countries that meet any of the following criteria. First, the receiving country or the destination country should have an existing system of labor laws. Second, the destination country should, or if they don't have an existing codification of labor laws, the destination country must accede, or at least must be a party signatory to a multilateral labor agreement. Or third, if they neither have a codification of their own labor laws, they are not a party to any multilateral labor agreement, they must be amenable, or they must enter into a bilateral labor agreement with the Philippines. Of course, given that wide net, or at least that wide ambit of qualification, we basically send to almost all countries in the world, almost all countries of destination. Name it, more probably than not, there is a Filipino worker that would be sent to that country. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we do not, as a matter of policy, suspend the sending of migrant workers. We do actually, by a mere governing board resolution and in consultation with the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we are able to suspend the sending of migrant workers to countries of destination which we deem, which by sending migrant workers or Filipino migrant workers to these countries would, we do suspend sending them to those destination countries if we deem that national interest would be put at risk, and at the same time if public welfare is also put at risk. So we do, we have suspended in the past. I wouldn't be naming the countries in the interest of diplomacy. I wouldn't be naming the countries, but I'm sure you are very much aware that in the past 2 or 3 years we have suspended the sending of migrant workers to particular destination countries, even though some of these destination countries are actually part of the top destination countries where we do send out our migrant workers. So that's basically the framework of how we do the how we send out, or at least that basically governs inter-country, or at least the country-to-country approach when it comes to labor migration. But of course, in relation to the Global Compact for Migration, at least to Objective 3, what we have basically is a very comprehensive system of information. Of course, a while ago it was already introduced to us. CIOP was already introduced to us. Comprehensive information and orientation program has already been introduced to us. The Philippines has been at the forefront of applying it, at least as part of the Abu Dhabi dialogues. We've been at the forefront of at least using this framework. But on top of that, and as already been mentioned during the when I was introduced, we're basically working on a codification of the pre-employment, employment, and the post-employment phase of labor migration into a compact, as one of the good senators who authored the law would want to say, yung manipis lang, that's the Filipino term for just the thinnest, or at least the most compact, or at least the least, at least it's something that's easy to read, and something that would be that any migrant worker would be able to carry in their pockets. As we and when we were actually discussing this with the Congressional Oversight Committee for the OFW Handbook, or the Overseas Filipino Workers Handbook, which is governed by Republic Act 11227, we were actually telling them, Your Honors, honorable senators, honorable congressmen, that's a very tough order. That's a very difficult. That's a very difficult order given to us, considering that as I've mentioned earlier, we do have a very comprehensive information system, and at least the laws, the framework, the rights and responsibilities framework of migrant workers from the Philippines is actually very comprehensive. On top of that, that same law, the OFW Handbook Act, and in terms of providing accurate and timely information to all migrant workers that would be sent out of the country, would need to be divided into the two main classifications of migrant workers that we have: the land-based and the sea-based. The Philippines, as a sending country, actually has the most number of seafarers that we do send out. And there is a wide distinction as to the types of rights and responsibilities that a seafarer would have as compared to a typical land-based worker. Okay, as a typical land-based worker, and of course, it's quite obvious. Geographically, a seafarer would be reporting to a ship that docks from port to port, that would have different jurisdictional requirements, and that of course would have different types of laws that would be applicable to them. Whereas a land-based worker would be deployed to a country of destination, say for example to Kuwait, and they would only be staying in Kuwait. If they would be deployed, say for example to the UAE, they would only be staying in the UAE. So we would be able to pattern, and we would be able to fit the information that we'd be able to give them to that particular country only. Aside from the type of worker, the country of destination, we are also required to provide information to migrant workers that would fit, or at the very least that would be in a language that would be easily understood by that particular migrant worker. From the recent discussion that we had, we were informed, of course, that in Kuwait they're giving out handbooks. IOM in particular is giving out handbooks, and some of the NGOs are giving out handbooks in various languages. And you may most of you would think that most of the migrant workers from the Philippines, and it still remains to be one of the advantages of actually getting migrant workers from the Philippines, would be able to converse, or at least would be able to understand basic English. English is a universal language. Unfortunately, the legal framework that we have is not in basic English. It is in a highly technical language that even us who are already trained in the legal profession, who are already lawyers, would sometimes have a difficulty in understanding. So we need to translate that into something that would be easily understood by the migrant worker. And we are not only talking about the information that would be coming from the sending country, such as the Philippines. We're also talking about information about the destination country in such a language that would be easily understood by the migrant worker. Okay, by the migrant worker. Okay, so we are required to publish in English, in the major languages of the Philippines, so as to cater to all, or at the very least to a majority of the migrant workers that we are sending out, or at least that we are sending from the Philippines. On top of that, of course, we do have the regular orientation seminars or the orientation programs that we conduct. Aside from the Migrant Workers Handbook or the OFW Handbook, we do have, of course, the pre-employment orientation seminar, the pre-departure orientation seminar, the post, or at least the post-arrival, or at least upon arrival at the destination country, they would have again another type of seminar hosted by the labor office in that destination country. So you could just imagine the comprehensiveness of the information. But going back again to William's question a while ago, is it enough? I would have to say, and this is at the very least to conclude this round of my discussion with you. I don't think it's enough, because even though it is out there, even though we are able to provide that information, there are still those who would be encountering problems in the destination countries. Okay, so long as there would be migrant workers who would be encountering problems in the destination countries, and then I would dare say that it is not enough. Okay, we should be doing more. Okay, we should be doing more, and we should be giving more in terms of accurate and timely information for them. So thank you.
Perfect.
That would be offered this round.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so candid, so straightforward in saying we are not doing enough. Because we hear always about how much the Philippines is doing, and then to hear this from you that we are not doing enough is a nice honest kind of expression of yes, there needs to be a lot more. I also find it very interesting of how you talked about the 5 conditions that you have for deploying of migrant workers, but I also know how the Philippine government has been able to deploy and get around the 5 conditions in some way, so that you are still deploying, and even if there is suspension, the suspension tends to be reactive rather than proactive monitoring and suspension kind of thing. But you can pick that up in the next round. But I also like, and I've always put it like this, when nobody was doing pre-departure, the Philippines gave the world pre-departure. When everybody was doing pre-departure, the Philippines gave the world pre-employment. When everybody started pre-employment, the Philippines started post-arrival.
Yes.
Now people are talking about post-arrival. I'm wondering what the Philippines will think of next. So
we're already talking about reintegration.
reintegration.
Return to country orientations.
So I'd like to hear your comments on that. But before I go to the next speaker on the panel, let me do a quick 2-round session with some of the people that I had called earlier. Attorney Noel, you're from Lawyers Beyond Borders. Your two minutes reaction, or what are you thinking at this moment? Attorney Noel.
Thank you, William. Good evening, everyone from Philippines. We're actually from the Lawyers Beyond Borders. As a matter of fact, with respect to this transmission of knowledge about or respecting the rights of the migrant workers, particularly, like for example, in the Philippines for the overseas Filipino workers, it is always a challenge how to meaningfully transmit this knowledge pertaining to these rights of the migrant workers, and also in the promotion of the welfare. Because basically, Like for example, us in the Lawyers Beyond Borders, we are actually advocating for that, a kind of an access to justice, because it is actually primordially basically stated as a right, no? As a right, that free access to courts and quasi-judicial bodies and adequate legal assistance shall not be denied to any person by reason of poverty. And our migrant workers is actually at the losing end, no? And because of that, they need really assistance. But the thing is, there is this cycle. There is actually this cycle in the life of a migrant worker, from the pre-departure, even from the influence itself of the family, and down to the integration, no? When the migrant workers actually repatriated. And because of that, the Lawyers Beyond Borders finds its ways also how to meaningfully help also the community. So for that matter, we came up with some publications also. Is actually the selected Philippine laws and rules and regulations of the overseas employment. And for the purpose, this is actually what we do and use, especially when we have our street legal education. That's actually, we go to the communities, gather these community members, and then lecture about them in a language or dialect that they know to them, so that the substance of the lectures will be, retained by them, because they can speak well and understood that language. And for the
And that
purpose
is a good
also,
point.
and
And
for
that
the
is a good
purpose,
point.
thank you,
I'll stop
William.
you there. And that is a good point. Taking the law to the people on the streets and getting them to understand in the language of the streets. I think that's a very, very important point in what Attorney Kiko said earlier as well. Very often the law is written in the language or in a language that is not accessible to the ordinary person. But thank you for that kind of an approach. All right. Anisur, as a returned migrant worker, are you doing a better job in giving information today than what you got in your time? Anisur, unmute your mic. No, your mic is not unmuted. Okay, while you are figuring that out, I'll go to you, Regiman. Regiman, if you can unmute your mic. And as a journalist, what have you discovered over time?
Yeah, thanks, Williams. I have always felt that media is the first source of information for the migrant workers. See, we all know that the guides and pre-departure manuals and all are published by the government, CSO, trade unions, but that don't reach fast to the migrant. And additionally, the updates uploaded by the country of origin or country of destination on their websites are not read. There is always a gap there. But media reaches fast, and I can confirm that the migrants read newspapers or online news portals regularly to know what is there for them. Let it be a policy change or law change announced by any COO or COD. Even a notice which COO or COD has to tell the migrant, they come to media and it gets out through the media only. So I feel that always.
Point. And that is a good point.
Thank
you for that point, Reggie.
Oh, thanks.
What apart from that, you were saying apart from that,
apart from that, Williams, media plays a vital role in telling stories. We always say that today's news is tomorrow's history. So during the COVID time, we told the story of the migrant workers, which can be revisited by the policy makers to know what the migrant workers told when it was happening on the ground. It's only we media
very good points.
Yeah, thanks, Williams.
Two very good points. Two very good points. When we are putting information, packaging information, how far do we collaborate and cooperate with media and putting this information across? And when migrants read newspapers, they go to media. How often is their story told and retold and captured, kind of thing? And before I move on, and Anisur, is your mic unmuted?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Are you doing a better job?
Thank you, William. Give me the opportunity. And in fact, I share one information that is recently due to COVID period, I have taken.
Please come closer to the mic. Maybe you can remove that earphone.
Yeah.
Earphone is not properly working. Come closer. Just remove the earphone. It will work.
Okay.
Remove from the computer. Yes, it is working now.
now, this COVID period, I have taken a lot of migrant workers interview, and say every time, very frequently, a message is changing. So initially the COVID, but Saudi Arabia and countries declared they will review the migrants' visa. Those are abroad. But I have shared with other migrants, don't worry about these things. But after a few days, we come to know that only when employer will apply to government, not migrant worker apply for their visa renewal. Say, once Saudi government declared they will subsidize salary to the employer. Some employee told me they got 60% salary from their employer, and rest will give to government. But after a few days, we came to know that 40% government will pay to the Saudi peoples or their nation, not the migrants. So frequently message is changing. That's why I request all of you to involve the migrants with the immediate and accurate information. Thank you.
Very pertinent, very pertinent intervention there, especially in this time. There's so much of information that has been going around. What is really the right information? What is it correct information? What are the misunderstandings? And this is exactly one of the examples that Anisur has given as a returned migrant worker who has been working on these issues for many years. Thank you for that. Yes, what is the right information? And before I move on again, the last person in this 2-minute round, Eva, did the GCM, the UN network, the UN system, did they get this right? Eva?
Well, I think they got the principles right, but the devil is in the details as usual, and it's in the implementation that is particularly concerning. I think that we are a very, very visual society and a very oral society these days. And while I've listened with fascination to all the projects in disseminating literature and information, which is absolutely essential, particularly the issue of translation, which has been indicated by so many of our speakers, I think that we also need to do something in the more immediate area of participation by the migrants themselves. And this was very well explained by Rejwan Kutab. It is very, very important, it seems to me, to include the voices of migrants, their stories, and perhaps a lot more video presentation than the written presentation. The UN is going more and more towards implementation on the ground, knowing that we have issues of xenophobia, issues of ignorance about the cultures and the languages that the migrants are forced dealing with. And they are going more and more to the idea of implementation, as I said, on the ground. It seems to me with videos and stories of migrants, they are producing more and more of this. And I think this is more immediate to a great many people. They react better to it.
Thank you very much, Eva, for that. The whole question of implementation and the GCM's third objective into implementation, and you have hinted about it. I think there is more and more recognition of the diversity among migrant communities and the different ways of learning, and like you said, visual and oral, and how do we develop these kind of tools? I think we are only at the beginning of this, and it would be good to see how this GCM Objective 3 is looking at new ways of implementing, or at least implementing in a way that, as you said, responds, or as Reggie says, and in the end, the migrant themselves are the best communicators. Their own peer-to-peer group learning kind of thing, peer process, but they are their own storytellers, they are their own educators, and they are their own their own community learns by listening to each other kind of thing. So I really like that intervention. And how do we, or how is GCM Objective 3 going to take that into perspective would be very good. Let me go back to the panel now. And Suha, I think you have been waiting very patiently. Thank you for being so patient. I'd like to come to Suha Labadi, who is our next panelist. And Suha Labadi is a project coordinator with the ILO technical projects. She's actually a project coordinator for 2 technical projects. Good luck with that. I know how difficult it is to handle the projects, but good luck with handling the 2 projects on the FAIR program and working with garment workers and domestic workers, both very vulnerable groups in Jordan. I have had the opportunity to visit Jordan and see some of the work of the ILO there, and I found it very impressive in some of the pioneering work actually that is being done by the ILO office in Jordan. So thank you for joining us, and over to you. What is the ILO doing by way of information, timely and correct information? Suba.
Thank you so much, William, and thanks everyone for giving the ILO the opportunity to share our experience, especially on the importance of providing migrant workers with accurate and reliable information, before even they migrate to the countries of destination. One of the things that we always want to focus on is that the purpose of information sharing with the migrant workers is not only about accumulating knowledge, but we really want them to take the right decision, make correct and informed choices at the right time. Now, if you want to go back to 2016, the ILO adopted the general principles and the operational guidelines for fair recruitment. The guidelines and principles basically list 13 principles and I think 31 guidelines for the national stakeholders to implement in order to reach fair recruitment. One of the core principles is basically to make sure that workers should have access to free, comprehensive and accurate information regarding their rights and the conditions of their recruitment and employment. Now, if you want to look at the experience of not only the ILO in Jordan, but also our national stakeholders, CSOs and NGOs who are working here in the country, that has, the estimate says that there is around 360,000 documented migrant workers here. The number of those who are undocumented is not clear. The government estimates the number to be around 800,000. One of the main struggles migrant workers face is basically lack of information or access to information. And our colleague from IOM, Mohammed, highlighted, and which is very true, that this would definitely increase their vulnerability to abuse, violation of their rights and discrimination. Now, the main issue is that we know that, whether human traffickers or sometimes labor recruiters or even employers, they do follow, the issue of holding or hiding information from migrant workers. Sometimes it could be information related to their pay and hours. They don't have, enough information about pay and hours. They sometimes get to know that information once they reach the country, once they reach Jordan. And at this stage, it's a bit difficult for them to decide to go back to their home countries. They already incurred different costs or fees, and they cannot just simply leave and go back home. Now, we've done a study this year on the recruitment from India to Jordan under the Work and Freedom Program. And we found that Indian workers got only aware, some of them, I'm not saying that all of them, but there is a number of Indian workers who only got to know about the terms of their contracts when they reached Jordan. It wasn't before. And not only that, they only realized then that it is a mandatory 3-year contract. Workers in the garment sector have a 3-year contract, and they knew that piece of information once they got to Jordan, not before that. In addition, the wage, for example, it's a simple example. Workers get paid here, their wage is basically calculated as cash and in kind. Some of them didn't even know that there is an amount that will be deducted as in-kind payment until they reached in-kind payment until they reached Jordan. Now, the ILO has been working for years with the government of Jordan to improve the compliance with the international labor standards, especially at the enterprise level in the garment sector. I'm very specific to the garment sector because this is basically what we're focusing on. It's the garment and the domestic sector. However, there are still violations related to fundamental principles at work that are still being reported, whether on limited or restricted freedom of association, illegal recruitment practices, and poor living and working conditions. Now, the issue, honestly, the widespread practice or the practice of contract deception, and I'll elaborate more on that, and of charging fees to migrant workers makes them, of course, more vulnerable to exploitation and forced labor. We have data that shows people who work here in Jordan would need probably around 9 months to pay the debt that they paid back home. Now, to address these abuses, the ILO is implementing a program called the Integrated Program on Fair Recruitment. It looks at promoting fair recruitment practices between countries of origin and countries of destination for workers who want to migrate in the garment industry. For Jordan case, we're focusing on what is called a corridor, a safe corridor, or promoting a safe corridor between Nepal and Jordan in the garment sector. Now, we have different objectives for the project, but we also have one main objective, which is basically to provide migrant workers with access to reliable information and services. Now, to achieve that, we're pursuing several, let's say, intervention tracks. We've partnered or developed a partnership with what we call an ethical recruiter or an ethical employment agency. That is basically focusing on two issues. Not only that workers should not pay any fees, but at the same time that they should be aware, they are fully aware of the working and conditions here in the country before they even come to Jordan or before they decide to migrate to Jordan. Now, because we know that the pre-departure training on providing information before taking the decision to migrate is a very critical aspect of fair recruitment, we've developed together with our national stakeholders a comprehensive pre-departure awareness program, only to provide like effective, comprehensive, and transparent information. But it is very specific to the garment or to the apparel industry in Jordan, so that migrant workers get to know a little bit about Jordan. The key information that we give during that training program is, first of all, we get, like, the FAIR team would provide information on the legal frameworks and policies in Nepal related to labor migration. There's also a section on living in Jordan. What is it? How to live in Jordan? How is the condition, the weather, how is the weather in Jordan, the culture, the religion, and all of these things, general information about Jordan and general information about the garment sector as well. And then we also give them information about the working and living conditions in the garment industry. Of course, including, we talk about how we make sure that they do understand the terms of the contract, their labor rights, the wages, working hours, health, safety, and support systems in Jordan. Now, these trainings are delivered, as I said, in the countries of origin through training centers. The ILO made sure that we equip the trainers so that they provide accurate also information on Jordan. And just to make sure that once they decide or make the decision to come and work in Jordan, they are fully aware of their working and living conditions. Now, I want to give a simple example based on the experience we had during the pre-departure training. There is, unfortunately, I don't have the exact number, but I know that there was a number of migrant workers. Once they took the pre-departure training, they decided not to migrate. They said, okay, this is not what we're aiming at. We just don't want to migrate at this stage. Other migrant workers who were deceived in the past, or who had friends or families who were deceived, their contracts were deceived in the past, were skeptical, honestly, about the information that we provided during the training, and kept asking the trainers all the time, are you sure that this is the case? And is there anything that you're trying to hide? Is there anything that we are missing? So they are, you know, they were, as I said, they wanted to make sure that this information that was provided to them was accurate. One of the issues that we noticed when they came to Jordan, because we meet with them once also they arrived to Jordan, is that we talked to different workers, but those who came through the pilot, let's say, through the Nepal-Jordan corridor, they were more empowered. They knew about the working and living conditions. They knew about how to calculate their wages. They did it themselves, how to calculate their social security and all of that. They were more empowered to bring issues of concerns to the management. So if there is something that was of concern to them, they took it immediately to the management and discussed it with the management. Now, to look at how the corridor is impacting, let's say, migrant workers, we did an impact assessment that is commissioned by Tufts. Tufts did the assessment. The interviews covered, or the assessment covered basically the workers who came through the pilot, who were fairly recruited, let's call them, and then conventionally recruited workers who did not come through the corridor. The findings was that migrants often do not learn that the pay have been promised. For example, they will tell them that this is what they pay, especially for, I'm talking about, of course, conventionally recruited migrant workers. They tell them, for example, that this is the pay that you will be getting back home when you go to work in Jordan. But they hide part of the information. They only realize that they will get that amount that they were told about in the countries of origin only if they work overtime or if they reach their production target. You know, so such information was only revealed when the migrant actually began working. And the problem is that this is exactly where workers faced verbal abuse or had that confrontation between the migrant worker and the supervisor, or that kind of misunderstanding. So and then one of the findings is that the earlier prospective migrants learn about their actual pay, hours, and working conditions, the more likely they are able to make an informed decision about migration. You know that generally, in general, key stakeholders always, or at most times, focus on recruitment fees, focus on confiscation of documents. And they do focus, and this is something that was brought up actually in the discussion, they do focus on having the contract in a language that the migrant worker can understand. The impact assessment found that it's very important. All of them are really important, including the recruitment fees and all of that. But in order to control the contract deception, that is basically what the migrant workers are usually facing, recruiters should go, we have to go beyond providing the contract in a migrant's native language. It's not enough to have, to insist, it's good, it has to be in the worker's native language, but we have to go beyond that. We have to provide them with pre-departure training that tells them or instructs them exactly on how to calculate their pay, their hours, and to make sure that this information is available to them before even they make the decision to migrate. Now, of course, again, that's one of the main findings, that fairly recruited migrants experience less contract deception than conventionally recruited migrants, because they get to learn about how or the amount that they're getting paid, the number of hours, their social security, and all of that. So this is one part actually related to providing reliable information to migrant workers. The FAIR is also working on, and I'm pretty sure that this is something that you probably heard of, is the TripAdvisor recruitment model that is designed and tested by the ITUC. It basically rates the recruiters, but this is not something that we're working on in Jordan. It's my colleagues in different countries are focusing on. Just one last thing, if you allow me, William, and this is because it's very important that we highlight, during COVID-19 pandemic, access to information here in Jordan became very challenging for migrant workers. The country went for a draconian lockdown for almost 1 month. The government during that time activated what is called the defense order and issued different defense orders on different areas. One of them is on payment of wages, on how to buy medicine because it's a lockdown, on how to shop for groceries, on how to have access to social protection schemes. Unfortunately, none of the defense orders were not translated into workers' languages. They were kept in the dark on the terms, on basically what is the content of the different defense orders that were issued. So this is, at least from my side, there's a lot to do, honestly. We have to do more. Whatever we do is never enough. When you, William, discussed at the beginning the info overload, this is not the case in Jordan. I wish we reach a stage whereby we have an information overload. There is always lack of information when it comes to migrant workers. So that's it from my side, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Suha. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for also sharing very candidly to us that yes, migrant workers are skeptical. I like that and I wonder how much information that migrant workers are receiving, they are skeptical about, because a lot of the information is packaged information. And they've been hearing stories, they know what is at stake, and they make some calculated decisions on their own in terms of risk they are willing to take. So I like that when you say they are skeptical also about some of the information they receive. I also like what you have said about making the right decisions at the right time kind of thing. And the program, I did not know that the ILO was actually so directly involved in pre-departure orientation. When you say that they are at the country of level of origin, you are doing this training in which migrant workers some have even decided that they will not make the journey anymore kind of thing, which is good. And I think we've got to move in that direction. I will ask you to think about, though, is that all this rights education that you talk about, at the end of the day, how many migrant workers, given the context we have in migrant kind of worker situation, at least in our region kind of thing, the power dynamics between employer and employees kind of thing, how much of that rights information really translates into empowerment and exercising of their rights in times when it is needed. I think this is something I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But then let me move on to the next speaker and on the panel. And this is Meru Surwala, who I've known as Meru for the longest time. And since 2004, and Meru has been in Bahrain since 1994. If you go to Bahrain and if you are looking for an organization that works on migrant worker issues, inevitably you will come across the Migrant Worker Protection Society. And I'm so glad that Meru is now, although she is back in India, that she was one of the founders of the society and played a very key role in working on a direct service delivery kind of role with migrant workers, even for some time establishing and running the shelter, and then eventually invited by even the Indian government to sit on the team that looks at the ICR fund kind of thing that is set up by the Indian embassy. Meru has had tremendous experience in talking to migrant workers who have come to her as victims, as survivors, as people in need of shelter. And she has processed, I'm not sure how many cases over how many years, but has been very, very instrumental in bringing relief and rights to migrant workers. Meru, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, William, and MFA and all the organizers for this opportunity. It's very important to hear voices from the destination country and from civil society and people like within our organization who have actually done grassroots level work with migrant workers. Hearing all the panelists over the course of this last 1.5 hours or so, I would think that with all the kind of work that is being done in the country of origin, we should actually be having no problem, because everybody has talked about the publications that they're printing and how much they are disseminating the information. But I have really seen the underbelly of failed migration. And there is this underbelly, which is about exploitation, lack of information, wrong information, or people who have just been so desperate and driven into migration without actually receiving the correct pre-departure guidance that they should have at the countries of origin. And I would specifically like to talk about this in the context of India, because it is a large country. And you do have many organizations, stakeholders who are undertaking pre-departure at various levels. But we are seeing migration that is now being pushed a lot into the rural or tier 2 or tier 3 cities. And we are not finding that the workers who are coming out from these places are properly and correctly informed. William, you also spoke about, is it information overload? But I'm not sure whether it is information overload or whether the migrant is just overwhelmed with the information. Because many times, the people whom we have spoken to, the migrants in Bahrain during the course of my almost 18 years of voluntary work with the migrant communities, most of them are coming either with very little education or illiterate, and they don't have the ability to read all these pamphlets and documents. Information is useful when they are able to hear it directly from workers themselves or visually hear the stories, like the way Regiment spoke about earlier, that we need to bring the voices of migrants out so that it becomes meaningful, the information that we are giving to them. We do need the information at every step and stage of the migration cycle. I think that is clearly established. But what is the kind of information that is coming out? It is sometimes incomplete and sometimes it is incorrect. And by incomplete information, I think a number of panelists have touched upon it, that key aspects of what to expect is hidden, deliberately withheld from workers, because if they were available and known to the workers prior to departure, perhaps the worker, like how Suha has pointed out, would be skeptical and would say that, no, I don't think I wish to migrate at this point of time. So we do have a situation where there is also this huge gap between managing the expectation of the worker and what they actually is the reality in the country of destination. And largely we are seeing South Asia is migrating to the GCC countries and the MENA region, domestic workers and garment workers, whether it is in Jordan or Lebanon. So they are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. They are not very educated. They get cheated. You have contract substitution, which is very common. But you have governments that are saying that, oh, we are taking out so many protection measures to take care of you. And you have people in the country of destination also who say the same thing, that, all this information is available to you. Then why is this information not being processed by the worker? Where is this big gap which is happening? Because there is a gap. And the workers are finding that there is, and it is also, sometimes misleading information, because you have government that says, your wage is going to be so much, your hours of work is so much, you will have a day off, you will have, end of term benefits. But recently we have seen, even the pandemic has, of course, upended everything. And under the guise of the pandemic and the umbrella of the pandemic, you are seeing wholesale people who are being denied wages, who are being denied end of term benefits. And suddenly, even from the month of March, people just abruptly lost jobs. And where is the information on how to handle this kind of stress? And this is something else that I wish to touch upon, is the mental stress that a worker faces when they have faced these kind of issues in the country of destination. I don't think any pre-departure training manual or curriculum is touching upon the mental health and well-being of the workers. And there is a lot of stress. You have workers who are migrating from close-knit communities, from families. The whole support structure is not there for them when they come to the country of destination. Particularly, you find I have worked with a lot of domestic workers because our shelter primarily took care of women, and a large percentage of the women who came to our shelter were domestic workers. And domestic workers particularly have to face this isolation, this loneliness, lack of mobility. You know, where do you access the justice? Sometimes their phones are taken away from them or they are monitored very closely. You have these security cameras in the house. So they find it very difficult that even if they have received all the information prior to their departure, how to deal with this in the country of destination, it is a very challenging situation for them. And mental well-being and mental health should be covered by both the country of origin within their curriculums for sort of giving the people coping mechanisms on how to deal with these situations. You also have, you know, at the time of departure, most of I have seen the pre-departure manuals of many of the civil societies and governments, and it'll all be one by one, it'll be told you have problem, reach your embassy, your passport should not be taken away, the passport is the private property of yours. But what is the reality when they come? When they come, I have dealt with workers who have overwhelmingly told me that their passports were taken away right at the airport and they never saw it again. Even after coming back and maybe filing a complaint, recovering their passport from the employer or from the organization is the single most difficult challenge which any activist will face in the country of destination. So you may be told all the things that are well and written on paper, but what is the real situation over there? How do you train a worker? How do you tell a worker that if your passport is withheld, what do you do? Okay, you go to your embassy or you go to the Ministry of Labor and you lodge a complaint. But that whole process is so tedious that most of the workers just give up. That is the actual reality over there. You have governments that are putting all these rules and regulations, and no government will say that our laws are detrimental for migrant workers. No country of destination has laws. Laws are excellent. Nobody's denying that. But where is the implementation? Where is the monitoring? Where is an errant employer who withholds passports actually been prosecuted in the country of destination? Where are the companies who are mass scale holding on to passports? I have not heard of a single company that was actually hauled up, penalized, or the owner was taken into prison for violating this basic right of all the workers. But it happens. It happens all the time. So we need to actually look at how do you plug these gaps and these loopholes, because these are the stress points for all migrants. These are the problems. These are the real issues that they are facing over there. The other point that I would like to talk about is a lot of the points have already been covered, so I'm not going to really go back and talk about it. But I do find that, I have been a resource person for a number of programs in Bangladesh and Nepal. And I found that, the pre-departure seminars or orientation programs can be very generic and can be, like a one-size-fits-all. And it should not be like that, because even the GCC countries, each country is different. The laws are different. The implementation is different. For example, in Bahrain, we've had mobility since 2008, ever since the Labor Market Regulatory Authority came in. They announced with a lot of fanfare that, there is mobility. But in reality, mobility is not the way a worker understands it in their own country. You can't just up and leave your place of employment and start working for another employer. There are clear steps which need to be followed. There are protocols which need to be, taken care of. But at the time of departure, they are told that, okay, you can change jobs. Now, Qatar also they have said that you can, mobility will be there for workers. But mobility is under very specific conditions. And you have to give the full information that if you're telling workers that mobility is permitted, then you need to also educate them under which conditions they can take mobility. Because in the country of destination, in the GCC countries, if a worker leaves their place of employment without prior information, the employer has within their rights to go to the nearest police station and lodge a runaway complaint. And when you have a runaway complaint in the system, any other violations that the employer could have, done against the worker, all that is finished. The worker is only seen through that immigration prism as a runaway. So we do not have all the information that is being given to the workers in the right manner, in the right time, and at the time of departure. The people who are training workers in the countries of origin need to be absolutely up to date with all the changes in laws which are taking place. And this needs to trickle down and be told to each and every worker who is attending their programs for all these pre-departure programs. I also want to touch a little bit on the pressure that workers also face from their families during the course of migration. This expectation and hope that they have, that now we have sent a person from the family to the Gulf countries, and life will just automatically become much, much better overnight. It doesn't happen that way. Many workers, and especially male workers particularly, the pressure they face is so intense. I once had a worker who actually told me that when he came to us with a really complicated problem, and he said, my family only calls up and asks me, when are you going to send the money back? And we asked him, why don't you share with your family the problems that you're facing here? And he said, no, they will not understand, because they would rather I returned home in a coffin. If I return home in a coffin, at least the whole family and the community will come and cry over my coffin. But if I return empty-handed as a failed migrant, I will be shunned and seen as a weak and a failed person. So there are too many pressures which are on workers from all directions. And it is difficult to, there's nothing that can prepare you except when you go there and you actually face the reality. The working conditions, the living conditions, the money that is told to you that, you'll be earning. It sounds very attractive when you convert it today, particularly with the rates all going up. Today, like one Bahraini dinar is almost 200 rupees. It sounds very attractive, but actually the cost of living over there is very high. The money that is normally given to a laborer for living wage, for so-called accommodation, as it's typically 20 BD, it sounds attractive to maybe somebody coming from the village. But actually in Bahrain, what does it buy you? It actually just buys you bed space. It does not even buy you shared accommodation. It's a bed space which the worker, they share over 8 hours, the shift for coming and just sleeping. So we have to look at, information. And there's just one point. I found that in Bahrain, ever since we had the radio FM, which came in, which was the regional radio channel, which came in, that became a very powerful and important tool for disseminating information. And it has been used by embassies. It has been used by the labor authorities within Bahrain to share information, because they are listening to that. I have also found that the printed information may not be that effective as a communication tool, but certainly the auditory, and especially, when it is punctuated with all your songs and information on your cultural programs, the workers are listening to the radio, and they do listen to the information that is being said to them in their own language. And even the government is using it to, disseminate the information. And for domestic workers particularly, I had practically all who came to our shelter, and we looked after like 14 nationalities during the course of my time at the shelter in Bahrain. And most of them said that we were not aware of all this. We didn't know that we would have this kind of, restrictive working condition. It is only when they came and they actually found, that their movement, their, the salaries are not being paid on time. There are deductions which are happening for no proper reason. These kind of, these are really friction points. And these are the stress points which can, they just kind of lead to a lot of problems and complications for workers over there. So my real hope is that, when the worker is leaving, undoubtedly information, timely, correct, complete information should be given, so that they are able to take a proper viewpoint and decide whether they really want to go. And I want to touch on one more point which Vijaya had made last week, where she spoke of dignity of work. I think this has to be stressed, particularly to our workers from the subcontinent. They are ready to travel thousands of miles to do a job that they will refuse to do in their own home country. The job of cleaning or the job of domestic work, which they will refuse to do in their own country. They will be willing to risk movement, or that they'll be ready to borrow money to pay for their recruitment and go all that way to do something that they could have done very much in their own country. And I think I'll stop over here because a lot of it has already been covered by the previous speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you so much, Meru, and thank you for that reality check. And I say reality check because you really did. I know this for a fact, like how you started the underbelly of failed migration, because many of those cases are cases that I know you went personally to, attended personally to, and went through that process too. And I really like what you said about the mental stress and health and think of well-being of migrant workers. I think this is nowhere in the pre-departure information, the coping mechanisms and things like that. And to recognize also, we might speak of information in such a general way, but we know that implementation of the law varies from country to country. In the most democratic of countries, it varies from marginalized groups to the most restrictive of countries. So let's be aware of that. And thank you for that very realistic check. And now I know we are very close towards the end of our webinar, but I had promised a few more people for the 2-minute round, but I'm going to reduce it to a 1-minute round. And let me start with Angie. Angie, is your mic on? Local government. Can you say
ready.
Something? Perfect.
Yes,
Local government.
Thank you, Will. Is the role of local government to provide information. First, we in CMA, in the Center for Migrant Advocacy, believe that migrants are capable to come up with informed decision only if they are given accurate and timely and relevant information that they need. In the Philippines, there are laws that mandate local governments to ensure that this information are available through setting up city and municipality level. Based on the law, also, local governments are primarily responsible to provide information at all aspects of overseas employment. But do they effectively perform their function as mandated by laws? We would say that based on our experience working with local government, we saw that there are gaps and the need to capacitate those who are expected to capacitate migrants, the need of local governments to be capacitated. But however, there are efforts to put up Migrants Resource Center or OFW help desk in different cities in collaboration with civil society organizations, local migrant organizations in the community, LGUs, and national government. This kind of partnership is helpful to fill in those gaps. And lastly, another effort for us now is to lobby for the amendment of another law, which is the seal of local good governance, to integrate migration as one of the criteria, so that we can force local governments to perform their obligations and to fulfill their duties to their constituents. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. I like that. How do you build capacity of those who are supposed to capacitate others? That's a nice one. And I like that the collaboration with CSOs might be helpful. Deanna? Deanna, you still with us? If not, I'll move to Piasri. Piasri?
Thank you. Yes, you have reduced our time also to 1 minute. Yes, yeah. I'll make 2 or 3 very short points. One is, of course, information overload or information is power. But the most important thing is, even with this information, how can the worker exercise this information rights? A very important issue is how can he exercise it in the country of destination. Meru also touched on this because you have structural constraints like the kafala system, domestic workers outside labor law, no robust mechanisms for access to justice. That is one point. Second point is that this information should not be one-sided, not only for migrant workers, there should be also we should target employers, recruitment agencies, people who violate migrant rights. I will give one example. So we have these bilateral MOUs or bilateral agreements, but they are not shared with these parties. Employers don't know that what their obligations and rights under these agreements are. Many countries don't share them. The third point I want to make is actually, we also have to think of the role of the destination country in information provision. So it's a shared responsibility, information provision to migrant workers. This is the weak point when they actually go to countries, the post-arrival information programs. Very few destination countries actually practice this. Republic of Korea and Singapore have some programs, and we heard about this NGO programs in Kuwait, but in many cases, I mean, it's quite difficult for the origin country to organize post-arrival programs in the countries. So I think this is something, which we can actually negotiate under Abu Dhabi dialogue or, take under some of these forums. Many relevant information like the Sri Lanka Information Guide, they produce a big information guide. It does not mention that the country has ratified the UN Convention. And it also does not mention anything about bilateral agreements. So there are many missing items. Thank you very much.
Thank you for pointing that out. And you also touched upon something that Meru said, the structural issues that do not allow empowerment of migrant workers in countries of destination, which then reduces any information that they have received kind of thing. It basically becomes useless in the sense of they cannot be empowered because of the structural dynamics there. But thank you for that. And Manfred, are you still on? Manfred? If Manfred and Diana are not on, then I will move back to the panel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Manfred, go ahead.
Yes. I have been listening to all the conversation, and I see some difference in the literature, in the history of literature on guides for migrants. In 30 years of experience from Italy, I remember that the first interventions for orientation of migrants were referring to migrants stranded or other kinds of guides coming from returning programs and fight of exclusion, urban exclusion in our European towns, because there were a lot of problems of deviance. Then we have seen other kind of programs like the remittances, with the interests of private companies pushing very much on this. And then, just after then, after the year 2000, came some international reasonment about the use of remittances for development or not. Then the guides for integration, when the European Union with the Euro started to work, then the guides for job seeking for migrants, then the guides for arrival, for the programmed flows of migrants. And then we started to write guides on the arrival of migrants, and the pre-departure are the last ones that in the history of European literature for migrants you find in these last 30 years. And I was listening to what you said, that the first guides in your countries, in the sending countries, were the pre-departure guides. So the direction is the opposite. Well, now the round is complete and the society can start to think, are we giving the correct orientation? Because this is a problem that I see in health and in education, and especially in basic documentation. We write guides for people who are entering legally. And then we have to write something also for somebody who entered not legally. But the biggest numbers are the people who are entering and residing not legally. And then they are the ones who most need the orientation. No? So you see the difference between the
Thank you.
and
Yeah, Manfred, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I like to connect with what you said, with what something that Eva said. And I'm going to go back now to the panel and to Mohammed, because I think both what you are saying, what Eva said, and what Mohammed started off with gives me the sense, and what Meru was saying is, I think we are only now beginning to understand what information to migrants is all about. And maybe the GCM objective 3, which looks like a very dull objective in the sense of give information to migrants, I feel in this webinar has come alive. It's a very dynamic thing, and we've got to rethink it. Mohammed, over to you, 1 minute. What have you heard?
Thank you very much.
What do you want to respond?
Very, very quickly. I mean, I think Cyrus really touched upon very, very key points. I mean, specifically the ones related to lack of harmonization of orientation between countries of origin and destination. And this is also a gap that IOM is very focused on addressing through its programs, is how can we have countries of destination speaking to countries of origin and guiding the information that is put in the different orientation stages. This is very key. This will address the issue again of orientation at the current at the country of origin being very outdated most of the time, but also information coming from countries of origin to what should be in post-arrival orientation becomes extremely, extremely key as well. Again, one of the points that Cyrus mentioned that I thought was very, very important, the issue of information on mental well-being and what to do when in these specific cases. Many would have seen, obviously read about the very high number of suicides that happen in the Gulf region specifically, and now you also have to ask the question of how much of potential information, access to information, may have addressed or decreased those number of suicides. Also, Soha, I think, and Cyrus as well mentioned the issue of financial literacy. I mean, that was the reference that was being made, which I think is extremely, extremely important, because, I mean, if you do not take appropriate financial literacy at the very initial stages, the whole formula doesn't work. It's a recipe for disaster, and this is what we've seen in many, many of the cases when what seems like a high salary is dangled in front of migrants. Finally, delivery of orientation itself and the content of orientation becomes very key to see how to involve various stakeholders in it. I mean, some countries in the Gulf now are taking the onus as governments to deliver post-arrival orientation, but when the connection with community organizations, obviously with employers, with embassies, become very key into ensuring that this information is relevant, but also in the delivery. And this is what we're encouraging some of the Gulf countries now, is to how to engage community organizations in actually delivering the post-arrival orientation that has been developed by the government, you know, and that sort of collaboration where we see becomes very key. And also the language and how this information is relayed becomes much better accepted by the migrant workers. I'll stop here, William, because I think I took over my 1 minute.
I think that last point can be a game changer. Gulf governments get involved with community organizations and countries of destination to be involved in the post-arrival education. That would be a game changer. Atiyab? Atiyab?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead. Your 1 minute.
Okay, so mainly you have touched on a very important point when you said the rate of suicides, the rate of suicide cases that has been really increased in the past couple of months and during the pandemic. And what we could relate it to is the hate speech that is going on in Kuwait against migrants. We have to be very serious. We have to be honest and transparent. There is some kind of, let's say, culture. In a part of that culture comes discrimination. And myself as a Kuwaiti, I have to put on the greatest efforts in cooperation with the Kuwait Society for Human Rights to combat such hate speech, because people are facing really difficult challenges, not only on the basis of the legal system, but only among citizens and other people who are sharing the country with. So as you, Mr. William, already read the statement that was issued by the KSHR a week ago regarding a woman was murdered, a domestic worker who was murdered by her employees for no actual clue or reason, but out of hate speech and hate. And as always, Mr. Salah Al Hassan confirmed before, we have a problem here that within this culture, most of the people do not understand that domestic workers and migrant workers have equal rights and have rights stated by the law. I really want to call all advocators here to spread how people should respect each other, dignity, and understand equality between people.
Thank you.
And that's
thank you, Atya. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And yes, call out when something is wrong, when information is wrong, call it out. I like that. Attorney Kiko? Attorney Kiko? I think we've lost Attorney Kiko. Suha?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Suha. I see Attorney Kiko is back.
It's okay.
Suha, go ahead.
So let me call it, when we talk about power dynamics, let me call it uneven. Unfortunately, it's uneven power dynamics here in Jordan. When we talk, we don't have proper representation when it comes to migrant workers joining, let's say, a trade union. Migrant workers in Jordan are allowed to join a trade union, but they're not allowed to vote or run for elections. The freedom of association is very restricted here. There is a high restriction when it comes to freedom of association. We have 17 registered trade unions, and that has been the case for many years, since the 70s. I haven't ever since then we didn't hear about new trade unions that were registered in the country. As I said, it's very controlled based on the especially based on the recent labor code changes or amendments that took place last year. However, this is something that we need to continue working on multiple fronts. We want to make sure that definitely giving information is not enough unless the workers are given the chance to exercise and use that information. So when we talk about translating all of the information into empowerment, definitely it's unfortunate. I assume it's a very small number who are able to do it unless we have a proper, as I said, representation in the country. Until then, empowerment, full empowerment, is not going to happen. So that's
one of the most visible forms of empowerment is the freedom of association. And if that right is not given, then how good is information for empowerment? Very good point. Very good point, Suha. Very good. Thank you. And then let me come to Attorney Kiko. Attorney Kiko?
Can you open your phone? Then directly you can speak, I think. Yes, just to remove this from computer.
Can't hear you, Attorney.
Directly to computer, directly.
Attorney Kiko is having some problems connecting. Okay, Meru? And I see Diana. Meru, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to continue with what the others have said. I think the point that in the country of destination, you need greater participation of civil society. And it is not just civil society should not just be used for providing services, which means like just now during the pandemic, we did see the civil society come out in really, really big way to come and, feed workers or to provide them with shelter or to, just take care of their day-to-day needs. This is not just the role of civil society, Civil society should also be taken seriously when it comes to engaging in policy matters or to taking the feedback, because the workers do come to us. They do trust us. That is, one of the reasons why our own organization became really, well known and we were trusted by the workers was because we responded. We listened to them. This is, one of the key things, which government and, maybe the larger organizations may have the larger resources, but I think the heart is really in civil society.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Bart.
So I think that this, civil society role in the destiny, and people should be allowed to, do this work openly. In the country of destination, people are still scared, to openly advocate for migrant workers because there is this fear, you're there because you're yourself on employment or you're on a family dependent visa. So people are a little, uncomfortable that, maybe if I cross the red lines, it could impact my own employment and my own visa status, or I could be deported. So I think these fears need to be removed. This confidence building measures should take place. It should be a true and meaningful partnership.
I like that point, confidence building measures. And I'm glad Mohammad Zarkani said that as his last point of governments working more with community organizations seeing the government outreach, and that confidence building measure then comes in place of different stakeholders getting involved. Diana, if you want to say something now, and Attorney Kiko, if since I did call you, if there is any way if you could unmute and speak, otherwise I'll give you 5 seconds to do that if it is possible. If not, then
William?
Go ahead, Attorney. Yes, go ahead, Attorney. Please.
Yes. Just to build on the closing statements of the previous speakers, I really just want to focus on the civil society aspect of it, on the coming together, and just a quick sharing from experience from what we do here in the Philippines. Aside from the policy part, we do have what we perceive as a multiplier effect. We cannot do it on the government side alone, and civil society is very important. Attorney Noel has been saying with their work with Lawyers Beyond Borders. Miss Ellen with CMA is here doing that. And just a quick sharing. Last year, with the help of the International Labor Organization, we went to the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Mindanao. We did a quick seminar to one of the most vulnerable communities in terms of migration, in terms of labor exploitation, the women of the Bangsamoro. And since then, with the help of civil society, with international organizations, with government organizations such as the Ministry of Labor of the Bangsamoro region, we've been able to assist them in helping more than, I think we've already had around 110 referred clients to our office alone, assisting them with their migration concerns. These are both deployed workers and would have been exploited or would have been trafficked workers. And without civil society, without the help of community organizations, without the help of local governments, and without the help of international organizations such as ILO and IOM, government would not be able to assist this at least this 110 migrant workers referred to us. So it is the multiplier effect, as we say, and the role of a multi-pronged approach and multi-sectoral approach is very, very important in ensuring that we are able to serve and that we are able to provide them with the necessary information and service that they deserve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that closing message. That was the one time I wanted to go to that region with Rex, and I was supposed to go, but I was unable to. But thank you for giving testimony to that event. I saw, Diana, your message. For some reason, you could not unmute your mic, but thank you for being with us. To the 265 people still on this call, thank you very much for being with us through for this 2 hours plus a few minutes. It has been great. My sense is that GCM Objective 3 is only beginning to unfold. This webinar, I think, has helped us to understand more of what is involved in GCM Objective 3. And maybe we need to think of how it, while in the short form it is titled as giving information in a timely manner to migrant worker. So maybe it's too maybe it does not bring out the dynamism and the nuances that we've had in this conversation. And we might want to look at that as governments come together to report on their implementation. We might want to give it a different twist or bring to it a deeper or a different perspective from what we have picked up in this conversation. Thank you all very much. It has been a very enlightening session, and I look forward to the group joining us in the rest of the 20 sessions that have yet to come. But looking forward to seeing some of you there. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William, for a very good